What's up guys? This video is all about different data types in Python. Let's get on with it. There are four main data types that you need to know about. The first of which are strings. Now a string is just a text value. Let's go ahead and create a variable called string1. And in here, open a quote. Strings always have quotes. I'm just going to write hello world. Let's have another string, string2. This time I'm going to put 1, 2, 3. Now even though I've typed numbers, that isn't a numerical value. That's not an integer. It's the text characters 1, 2, 3. Let's do one more. String3 equals, and this time we'll go for a random assortment of numbers, letters, and some special symbols as well. So strings can contain all of those different characters. Let's have a look at the next data type. Integers. So an integer, as you probably know from maths, means a whole number. So let's go ahead and create a variable called integer1, and I'm just going to store the value 0. Let's make another one called integer2, and let's store 42, and I'm going to store one more, integer3, and let's go for minus 6,547. All of those are perfectly valid integers. Notice that none of them have a decimal place, because integers are whole numbers, whether it's positive or negative. So the third data type we need to look at are floats. These are also known as real numbers. Float values have decimal places. So for example, 0.0, that is now a float value. Putting that decimal place makes it a float and not an integer. Let's make another one, float2. Let's go for 3.14159. Float3. And we'll go for minus 643.87659. All of those perfectly valid floats, and it's that decimal place that makes it a float and not an integer. The fourth data type are Booleans. Now Booleans are really straightforward because you can only have two possible values. So let's make a variable called boolean1. This is going to be set to true, capital T, that's important. And we'll make another one that's called boolean2, which can be set to false. That's it. A Boolean value is either true or false. Now let's look at how we can convert between some of these different data types. Have a look at this example. I'm going to print the string 123 times 2. If we were to actually calculate the integer 123 times 2, it would give us 246. But when I run this, you can see that it takes the string 123 and it does it twice. So now it's 123, 123. Not exactly what we were after. If I take that string and I put it inside the int function, like that, that means take the string 123, convert it into the integer 123, and then multiply it by 2. So now it actually does maths and gives us the answer. Let's have a look at another example. Let's take 123 again, and I'm going to add on 456. These are two strings, and if you've seen my string video, you'll know that what's happening here is something called concatenation. Basically, it's going to glue these two strings together, and it's going to output 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I wanted these numbers to be added together as integers, again, I would need to convert each of them to an integer by wrapping it inside the int function, like this. So each of these string values is converted to an integer and then added together. So now it will be 123 plus 456, giving us 579. Now this also works, of course, if you have the string stored in a variable. So I could store the text 123 in num, and I could then say print num times 2, and this is just like the first example that we had. Convert the contents of that num variable to an integer, and it does maths instead. Now let's have a look at converting between floats and integers. Let's store the integer 99. If I now convert that to a float, and I'm just going to go ahead and print it so you can see it, float num. If we look at the output, we can see that it's now got a decimal place and a 0 after it. So converting an integer into a float gives it that decimal place. Now let's say that we actually had a float value to start with, so num is now a float. What I'm going to do is convert that float into an integer, and we'll see what happens. So int num. Convert the value stored in the num variable into an integer. So what happens when we have 99.9 and we turn it into just a whole number? And when we do this, you can see that we've actually lost the 0.9. We've lost the decimal part of the number altogether. So when you convert a float into an integer, just be aware that you lose any fractional part of the number. Now, something else to be aware of is that whenever you carry out a division, so let's have a variable called divided, and I'm going to set it to 10 divided by 2. So obviously the answer is 5. But note, when I print divided, the answer we get is 5.0. So whenever you do a division, even if the answer is a whole number, it's always the float data type. And in fact, we can check this using a handy function, which is the type function. If you put something inside type, so let's put that in there, it will actually tell you the data type. It's a float. Let's use that to check some other data. Print type, and in here, let's put a string. It tells us that it's a string. Let's try changing that to an integer. It tells us it's an integer, and we'll try changing it to false, and it tells us it's now a Boolean. You can actually check to see whether a variable contains a certain data type using an if statement. Let's have a look. Let's use that divided example again. 10 divided by 2. And I'm going to use an if statement to see if, and I'm going to use a special function here called isinstance. This allows us to check whether a value is a particular data type. So if isinstance divided, which is the thing I want to check, comma, the data type that I'm looking for, colon. So that basically means if the divided variable is a float, do something. And I'm just going to make it print, it's a float. Hopefully now you have a better understanding of data types. See you next time.